Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Can't be asleep just yet, surely. It's lovely to see you this morning. My name is Rebi, if I don't know you, and I'm really excited for us to be in this series on Joshua. We started it last week, and we're going to be spending some time sort of immersed in one book, which I love. If I was to have a favourite way of looking at the Bible, it would be this way, to sort of get really stuck into one book. And so we're in the book of Joshua, and last week Gareth sort of gave us a bit of an overview of where that fits in the bigger story of the Bible, and sort of introducing this idea of Joshua leading, now the leader of God's people at the time, the Israelites. And so we're going to jump into the story in a moment, into Joshua 2, with the story of Rahab. So it'd be great for you to have it open. We're going to read through it and talk through it as we go, because it's quite a long passage, and we're going to go with the story that way. But as I've been thinking about this, sort of looking at this story this week, I've just been really, reawakened to how much we love a story. You just love a person's story, whether it's a book that we read, or whether it's a magazine we pick up, whether it's when we scroll, don't we just love being a bit nosy? Is it just me? Just me. I don't believe that. Who loves a good story? Who finds, love about them? And even if I'm watching the Olympics, which is 4 weeks of the year, if you count Paralympics, where I pretend to care about sports I have no clue about. But I just love getting they won. I wonder who they're married to, wonder what their story is, wonder where they're from, don't know where that country is. I just love a story, right? We love finding out about people. And I think that God knew this, that there's a sort of human nature, that we really care about other people. And it suddenly occurs to me that the Bible is like the original way of doing that, right? There's these stories and these people that we get to really nosy in on, that we get to, learn about their lives, and not only be a bit nosy about, but also these are people who God said, these people you can learn from their stories. They're people just like you and me, whose stories speak of who God is, speak of what is to come, and what life with Jesus is like. And I just think that's a really good way to think about scripture, and think about the people that we read. And so today our person is Rahab, and we're going to be looking and getting into her story and being a bit nosy, but also seeing what can we learn from her as a person, as someone who is named in scripture as someone we should pay attention to. And I think she's worth paying quite a lot of attention to. So we're in Joshua 2, and we start with Joshua deciding to send, so they're camped just outside the promised land, and so he decides, okay, we're going to go and we're going to send some people to just spy out the land again. It happened a while ago. We're going to go in, we're going to send 2 people to spy out the land and see what's going on. So here we go. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. That the woman had taken the 2 men in and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they'd come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. Don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly, you might catch up with them. Brackets. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords in the Jordan. As soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. So imagine we've got Rahab, who was a prostitute who probably lived in the walls of a city. If you've ever been to York, or a city that's got big walls, her house would have been like in the walls of the city, right on the outskirts of the city. And she was a prostitute, and these men, these spies, decided that this is where they were going to hide. Read into that what you will, who knows what their intention was, but in an innocent way, it was probably a really good way to go and hide, because people would be coming in and out of a prostitute's house. It would have been really normal to show up at a door and been let in. And so I guess they thought they might have been being inconspicuous. But either way, Rahab chose to hide these men in her house. And what's crazy about this is that Rahab was not an Israelite. So the Israelites were the people of God, and Rahab was a Canaanite. She did not, her community, her culture was not one that honoured the God of Israel. They weren't the people of God at that time. And yet there's this moment where she chooses to hide these men in her house. I wonder why she chooses to do that. So let's carry on reading. Verse 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof. She said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did in Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Ammonites east of the Jordan, who you'd completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts sank, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is the God in heaven above and on earth below. The thing I think is so amazing about Rahab is that she is so confident of who God is. There was like this moment, clearly she'd been hearing that phrase, we have heard. We see it a few times in that passage. We have heard. She'd heard the whispers of this God of Israel who was doing amazing things. She wouldn't have read it on her phone, she wouldn't have got it in the newspaper, but it would have been stories and people talking about, there's this God doing some stuff. And she chose to align herself to that God. She saw this moment. She realised that the spies had come to her house, that she had this opportunity to side with the God of heaven and earth, and she chooses in that moment to opt in and be part of the story of God. That's amazing. How did she know that this was a moment? Well, I think, and I'm only reading into this, but I've got this feeling that she'd been listening and hearing these stories of God and choosing to say, wow, this God has done some stuff, and I want to be part of what is going on. She was confident in who God was and what he had already done. And I guess the first question for us this morning is, are we really compelled by the story of Jesus? Are we really amazed by what God has done? We have even more history and even more story to know about. Are we compelled to say, wow, God has done amazing things, and I want to be part of that story? And for Rahab, that meant denying her tribe, her culture. It meant stepping away from the origins of what it meant to be a Canaanite, and to say, actually, I'm going to choose to align myself with this God, the God of Israel, who's the God of heaven and earth. And for us, maybe that doesn't quite transpire in the same way, but I think we are called to align ourselves with the God of heaven and earth. And in our culture today, that is odd, right? That's not the norm, and sometimes it means denouncing things. It means stepping away from maybe places or people. Maybe it means choosing to say, you know what, I'm going to believe in the God of the Lord of heaven and earth, and that's going to mean saying no to some things or to some people. For some people that literally means their biological families, for other people that looks really different. But God calls us to say, God is so amazing that I'm going to choose to step into this story of God. And so I guess my first question is, are you excited enough by what God has done already? Because sometimes when life's really tricky and we're wondering what to do, we can get overwhelmed and scared and frustrated, and it's so easy to get into that moment, isn't it, of, everything is hopeless. And yet what Rahab shows us is she looks back and she says, wow, look at what God has done. I've remembered the stories of what he's done, and I'm going to choose to align myself with that story. I wonder what that means for you this morning. So that's the first thing that Rahab was looking back in confidence. So let's now see what happens in the rest of the story. So we're in verse 12. Now then, this is still Rahab talking, please swear to me by the Lord your God that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. Just going to pause there a second, because another thing that strikes me is this brilliant dialogue Rahab has. And she says, give me a sure sign. I just love her boldness in that. She's like, look, I've hidden you, done you a favour. And I don't think it's like that. I don't think it's transactional, though it could, maybe it was. But I think there's something for Rahab about, I've aligned myself with this God, with your God. And how will I know? give me a sign of his faithfulness and his protection of me. She was sort of holding God and the story that she'd heard to account and saying, okay, God, you're faithful, you're protector, what's that going to look like for me? And I sort of love the sort of height in Rahab in this moment, which I sort of like, because that's a bit what I'm like, so I guess I resonate with that. But I love that she comes to God through these spies and says, what are you going to do, God? Give me a sign. And I wonder for some of us, maybe we have forgotten that we can dialogue with God. And there's another preach on what happens when we say to God, give us a sign, and he doesn't, but I'll leave that one to Matt or Gareth. But today I want to say, like, there's some moments when we say to God, give me a sure sign, and he goes, brilliant, I'm going to show you. You know, when I was in my 20s, I was single for a long time, and I really held God to account, and I said, okay, God, if being single is possible, if it's possible to be truly satisfied, to be truly okay as a single woman, then show me what that means. Show me what it means to be fully satisfied and fully okay with being a woman of God as a single woman in the world. And God showed up. He showed me what that meant, to be fully satisfied and fully okay walking with him. Because I said, give me a sure sign. I think when we go to God and say, show me, he's waiting a lot of the time. You know, he's our dad. He loves us and he wants to speak to us. And so often I think we get worried in the fear and anxiety, and sometimes I think, you know, it's going to God and say, show me who you are, give me a sign. And I think there's way more going on than we notice sometimes. So I wonder what that teaches us. How do we live like this, like Rahab did? So let's see what that sign was. So, verse 15, she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, go to the hills so that pursuers will not find you. Hide yourself there for 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. Now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on you unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you have let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all of your family into the house. If any of them go outside the house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads, and we will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be out of the house. Their blood will be on our heads if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath that you made us swear. Agreed, she said. Let it be as you say. She sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there for 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told them everything that had happened. They said to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands, and all the people are melting in fear because of us. So it was great news for the spies, but they thought they'd done a great job. They went back to Joshua, they said, it's all going to be okay, and we'll come on to that and what happens with them next week. But I want to go back to Rahab. So this sure sign that she asked for, the spies say, okay, you're going to tie this scarlet cord out of your window. So imagine, you know, her house is in the city walls, and she's going to tie this scarlet cord out of the window. And if you keep that there, then your family and yourselves will be saved. And for me, this is a real picture of what hope looks like. Imagine Rahab, she's like, okay, scarlet cord in the window. One, that's a bit odd, right? Like, it's a bit weird to tie a rope out of your window. And I think this really speaks, or has spoken to me, certainly, about what hope looks like. Rahab now had this moment where she could probably see the army outside of the city that was about to come and attack the place where she lived. She could see them, she could think, there's quite a lot of them, and I'm on the edge of the city. Anyone who plays any sort of battle games will know that's a terrible place to be if you're about to be attacked. You don't go on the edge of the wall, do you? It's not a good place to be. And so she's like, okay, so my house is right on the edge of this city. I can see this big fat army, and yet what is going to save me is a lovely piece of scarlet cord. It's a bit nuts, isn't it? It's a bit bonkers when you think about it. And yet I think this is what hope in God sometimes looks like. Because sometimes Jesus calls us to hope in moments that feel utterly hopeless. Jesus calls us to trust in him in moments that feel really, really difficult. And yet, this picture of what hope is like, I think, is so good for us to remember. First off, this hope was visible, right? Rahab, in that moment, tied the cord out of her window. It was weeks, spoiler alert, but weeks until the city was attacked. It wasn't just like, tie the cord in the window, we're going to come and attack you, it's all going to be okay. It was weeks that she had to live with this dangly bit of rope out the window. Can you imagine people walking past? Rahab, you dropped your washing out your window. You know? She would have been, thanks, Jane. I was right with you. Thanks, Richard. No, that was weird. That was so weird to have something dangling out of her window. But there's a hope. When we have a hope in Jesus, I think it has to be visible. I think people have to say to us, why are you hopeful? Everything else is falling down. The whole city was about to be destroyed. And sometimes that's what it feels like, right? Sometimes trusting in Jesus can feel like the strangest thing to do. And yet, we know the story of what God has done and the story of what God will do is that that is where hope is. We have got a sure God who we can trust in. And so it's visible, it's bold, it's courageous to hope in Jesus. And it often doesn't quite make sense. It made no sense that it was a scarlet cord out of the window. How is that going to stop a building falling down? You can understand if they'd said, right, here's a tool, batter up your door, secure the place, put some extra cement on the bricks. Probably didn't have cement, did they? Was it done? No, it wasn't done. I don't. Was it? Oh, thanks, Jess. Secure your bricks. That would have made way more sense. And yet, what they said was, tie this scarlet cord out of your window. And again, the hope that we have in God, I don't think is meant to make sense in our culture. We're meant to be the light in the darkness. Sometimes it's meant to feel a bit silly. I said at the 9 o'clock this morning I was sharing that, so I've been in Wolverhampton for 10 years, and probably about 7 years ago, I really felt like God was saying that I needed to move closer to church. I live the other side of the city and have done the whole time, and it felt like a really exciting thing. I was like, yeah, God, I'm on board with that. We'll do it tomorrow. And God had different ideas, and I think there was a planting of that dream that was important a long time ago. And I've had to do loads of waiting and loads of trusting and loads of hopefulness that along the way and at times has felt like, really? It's felt ridiculous. And yet hoping in Jesus and trusting in him sometimes is believing something that feels really counter to what we think is going to happen, but trusting that God is faithful. Hopefully, as of a month's time, we might be here, which is very exciting. But it's trusting that God gives us these dreams and these hopes, and he is faithful. But sometimes you can feel a bit silly saying the dream or saying the thing you're hoping for. But actually, there's this hope in Jesus that is different to what the world says. And the final thing about this hope is that it involved others, right? It says, you've got to bring everyone else in your house. Imagine them all sat around, what are we going to do, guys, when they attack? Should we go to the bunker? What should we do? Why don't we go really in the middle of the city? That would make a lot of sense. We could hide in that shop that we know. Maybe we could go to the cellar. And Rahab says, guys, come in my house. It's going to be safe. Really? You've got to think they were like, okay, Rahab, that's a really lovely, nice idea, but we're going to go. And she's like, no, trust me. Trust me that this is truth. And sometimes sharing our faith and helping others believe in the kingdom of God can feel like we're saying to people, trust me. Trust me that this is the truth. And I wonder if Rahab shared the stories that she knew. I can imagine her saying, remember the God of Israel that we've heard of. I had these spies and they told me this thing. Trust me that there's this moment that's going to happen. This is where you need to be. I wonder if we listen to those voices around us, and what I love about being part of a church community is we can help each other say, remember what God has done. Remember that it's worth trusting, it's really worth digging in. It's worth having hope because Jesus is faithful. And we can come alongside each other in moments where we don't feel like we've got enough hope, or where our cord feels really flippin' flimsy and really small. We can look at other people and go, oh yeah, come on, we can do this. We can have hope that Jesus is faithful. And the final thing I want to think about, I'm not going to tell you the end of the story because that's in a few chapters' time. I have to come back, I'm afraid, and hear what happens to Rahab. But as I was thinking, what's amazing about Rahab is she has this legacy in the story of Scripture. So we'll find out what happens in Joshua, but zooming out a little bit, she actually continues to be part of the story of Jesus. Incredibly, she ends up in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew. I think there's a reference bang on the screen. So in the genealogy of Jesus, where it says where Jesus came from, Rahab was in that genealogy, which is not only miraculous on loads of levels, but she was a prostitute. And yet she ends up being in the line of Jesus, named as a woman in the gospel. That is amazing. There she is. Salmon, probably Salmon, not Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. She ends up being quite literally part of the story. And then she's mentioned, she's the only woman, fun fact, for those of you about fun facts, I learned this week, she's the only woman from the genealogy from the Old Testament to be mentioned again twice in the New Testament. The first in James chapter 2, where it talks about her righteousness and this, the way that she lived and she made this bold choice. And then finally in Hebrews, and Hebrews 11 is an amazing chapter if you want to get some sort of big names of Scripture. Hebrews is a really good one. And I just want to finish here by a little gentle challenge. So this says, by faith the prostitute Rahab, because she was welcomed the spies who were not killed. Because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what I love about this is that she, for one, is the last person mentioned, and then he says, I don't have time to talk about David. I love that Rahab gets more mention of David, it's quite amusing. But so she was given this whole sentence of her faithfulness in the story of Jesus, and it got me thinking, what would our sentence be? If there was a legacy written about our lives and our journey, what would your sentence be? All of us have different parts to play. Rahab's part was hiding some spies under some straw. It's not a very significant thing when you think about it, and yet that one decision meant that she ended up as part of this incredible story. So I'm bringing you a bit of homework this week if you like that, or maybe you could do it in your life groups. What would your sentence be? I tried this a few, I remembered I'd done it a few years ago, and I looked back to find it. I'm happy to share with you. So mine was, by faith, Rebi will have been patient and willing to trust God in her every day. As a result, she will have lived in peaceful wonder all of her days. That was just one of them. I wrote a few because I like words, obviously. But I wonder what your sentence would be. What has God called you to? What would the rest of your sentence be? Because I think there's something about leaning in, as well as Rahab looking back and saying, okay, we're confident about what God has done. She was really aware of what God was doing in the moment, wasn't she? Enough to trust and know that she had to hide those spies. But also there's a looking forward of knowing what God was going to do, and she would have had no idea of the consequence or the legacy that she had. And this isn't, I'm not talking about being a big name or having, not telling loads of people about Jesus. Maybe that's your thing, maybe that'd be brilliant. But I think there's a sure faithfulness to the fact that all Rahab did was trusted in God and hid some spies under some straw. Right? And for some of us, our everyday feels really mundane. At the moment, I spend a lot of time looking at a lot of G-play. And there's some days when I'm like, really, God doesn't know what it's that exciting. But I'm also getting to raise another human in the story of Jesus. What a privilege that is. What is the thing that you're doing right now that you can reframe, that you can do by faith? Because I think if we reframe it, we remember that we're part of this big story that God has called us to. And that's exciting. And it involves hope. When things feel really hard to hope. It involves sharing it with other people. It involves being bold and courageous. But it can end up in miraculous stories and as being part of something Really, really exciting. So I might ask some of you next week, what are your faith sentences? What did you write? Maybe it's just, by faith, I stay faithful to God all of my days. What an amazing thing that is. What an incredible thing that would be to be able to get to the end of your life and say, I was faithful to Jesus every day. This isn't about big things, but also let's lean into what God called us to. What is our little bit of the story that we can do faithfully, trusting in Jesus? Why don't we just take a moment to pray?